tense meetings with broadcast executives to sit-ins at network headquarters. And to everyone's surprise, these methods sometimes worked, with occasional depictions popping up on broadcast television that were not entirely mortifying, and even, on a very good night, positive. This newfound prominence presented a valuable opportunity. In decades past, homophile organizations had maintained a low profile, staying largely hidden in order to avoid oppressive laws and social stigma that could ruin a person's life. With the rise of pride events and more confrontational activism, the 1970s marked a time of unprecedented queer visibility. But this was limited primarily to major cities. Achieving visibility in Middle America was a challenge for queer people, but their cause was aided by television, the vast wasteland that beamed conversations, stories, jokes, and news to the 95% of American homes that owned a TV set by the decade's start. But queer visibility faced formidable opposition from powerful conservative forces that were equally determined to stake a claim on the airwaves. Throughout television's history, from its earliest transmissions in the 1920s to the present, television has been the site of a never-ending tug-of-war for control of the dial. The man whose call Marsha Posner Williams received that night wasn't acting in a vacuum. His outrage had been stoked by pearl-clutching groups like the National Federation for Decency, NFD, and the Coalition for Better Television, CBTV, created by conservative media activists Donald Wildman and Jerry Falwell, with the intention of bending the medium to their will through church-based protests and nationwide boycotts of any programs they deemed offensive. By the 1970s, these conservative campaigns had become a point of considerable concern for networks. We at CBS see in Mr. Wildman's coalition perhaps the greatest assault on intellectual freedom that we have witnessed in many years, said Gene Mater, CBS's vice president in the 1970s and 80s. Speaking from his experience as news director of Radio Free Europe in East Germany after World War II, he continued, "The efforts of the coalition are only a half a step removed from book burning." "They called me a bunch of names," gloated Wildman in a speech. "They called me Hitler, they called me McCarthy. That ain't bad for a country preacher from Mississippi." Comedy programs like Soap were a focal point in this ideological back and forth. Sitcoms had become a staple of weeknight schedules, starting in 1947 with the Dumont Network's Mary Kay and Johnny. Since then, they've been among television's most popular programs, from I Love Lucy to The Andy Griffith Show to All in the Family to Friends. They have also been among the most widely syndicated programs, thriving in an afterlife of reruns for successive generations. And crucially, tucking controversial topics in amongst farcical families and wacky workplaces can have a disarming effect. Jokes make challenging ideas more palatable, whether audiences are watching Archie Bunker grapple with the discovery that the woman he saved with mouth-to-mouth was actually a man in drag, or Blanche Devereaux obtusely failing to recognize what her brother means when he introduces his very special friend, or Jerry Seinfeld insisting, "Not that there's anything wrong with that." Particularly after the boundary-pushing success of All in the Family in the early 70s, sitcoms used comedy as a medium to deliver provocative ideas about bigotry, tolerance, and sexuality, topics that audiences might avoid if they were not sweetened by laughter. And thanks to the pervasiveness of sitcom syndication, they were seldom further than a dial turn away, even in the most remote parts of the country. "Laughter is an intravenous," sitcom pioneer Norman Lear said in a 2005 interview with the Television Academy Foundation. "Causing people to think while they're laughing is the intravenous of messaging through laughter." Lear's observation described my own personal experience as a teenager, nearly 20 years after Marsha Posner Williams took that angry phone call. I was an anxious, closeted kid living in a small Connecticut suburb in the mid-1990s, and gay role models weren't exactly in plentiful supply. That is, until I landed on soap reruns on Comedy Central. The sitcom drew me in with laughs, but I kept watching it for Jody, the gay character, one who was witty, sophisticated, aspirational, and cute. At the time, I was keenly aware that there were large, powerful organizations out there opposed to my existence. But seeing Jody on Soap was a signal that I might also find others like me, that queer people could thrive, and that I might manage to find not only a community where I belonged, but an entire culture. That was the power of a syndicated sitcom, and it's why I became fascinated by primetime comedy as a means to shape public perception. I started tracking down the moments in shows that told me I wasn't alone, from a lesbian kiss on Roseanne to homosexuals hiding out at Cheers. It was around this time that the internet was gaining widespread adoption, which provided me with an opportunity to learn about the real-life history of queer liberation, and I was struck by some surprising parallels. For example, I noticed how the 1960s Bewitched